So, as you can see on the screen, our talk today is surrounding this particular book, The Conscious Being, and all things related to that. Naturally, I think we have our leg in the door a little bit because I was blessed with the opportunity, kind of lucked out to give a talk with an actual psychologist. So kind of didn't have to do much with the work since she's already, has some background in it more so than I do. But this book is amazing. And in preparing for this, Paul and I discussed how amazing the Joanna de Angelis series is. And there was a huge push recently for a lot of her books, especially the part that's the set of books that's part of the psychological series. And I think it's about maybe 20 books, give or take. And this is just one of those books, The Conscious Being. There's many others that actually have been recently translated into the English language by a particular publisher called Liao Publishing. You can search for them online.
We're going to get to it with the slide.
Oh, yes, that's true. I'm going too fast. But anyway, it's just something we really enjoy her books a lot. Right, Paula?
Yeah. I am so thrilled that having been trained as a psychologist, there is this psychologist available in the spiritual plane. It would have been a blessing to have known her the first day I signed up for Psychology 101, but as it may, I got to know her now. I thought it was interesting because, of course, I'm only an English-speaking person, so I have to wait until everything comes into English. So this book came in 2016, the same year that the Maryland Psychological Association dedicated their magazine to religion and spirituality and clinical practice. So I love it when the waves seem to synchronize. The openings occur. This isn't even published in paper anymore, so it's in my treasure chest.
And it just so happens the Spiritist Medical Association is actually having an event currently today that's basically talking about integrating spirituality into clinical practice. So how divine everything just kind of sort of fell together. But there is that need, right, Paula, we believe, for spirituality to go into medical practices and really all areas in education. I think so.
Yeah, I think whenever anybody has ever informally consulted me, they would like to work with a transpersonal or spiritually based psychologist. We can't say they're in a plethora right now. There are not that many. It's a growing awareness. But I think it's easier now when you are working with a mental health practitioner to bring up the subject of spirituality and religion. They are much more open to discussing it and having it be part of your relationship with them.
Definitely, absolutely. But wanting to transition, and we were just showing some of her books that exist in English today. So really, for those who are English speakers, we really don't have an excuse anymore not to have access to this type of knowledge and information. And like I was referencing earlier, you can go on Liao Publishing if you just Google Leal, as well as SGNY also has the for purchase the Psychology of Gratitude and Existential Conflicts. Just letting those who may not know where to get these books, because some of the books we are sold out of, where to get them and purchase them yourself, because they are a great resource for you or perhaps for a friend. But ideally, we're first reading and educating ourselves and sharing with others, ideally. But these are pretty amazing books. I did add 2 books on the end there, as you could see, Happy Life and After the Storm. So those are all also excellent books. And if you are an avid reader of Joanna, or even if you've read 1 or 2 books, which we'll get into in a second here, you'll find that a lot of her books are really from a psychological standpoint, right?
Yeah. Whenever I'm listening to Spiritist talks in the last couple of years, I would say know thyself comes up pretty frequently. Do we all agree? No matter what topic we're on, we go back to Socrates. But then the big question is, how do you know yourself? Because all of the people, I'm sure, that gravitate to this type of work are working on themselves. It goes hand in hand with evolving. So we're always looking for some new way to know ourselves better, which is what is gifted in all of these books. And when Kirsten and I were preparing, you know, I asked her, I said, how many people do you think have read her books? And we said, why not ask you? So could anyone here share a Joanna book they might have read?
Y'all have Happy Life.
That's good.
Antonia?
You read the book?
Do you know, remember the name of it, or Family Constellations you've read? Even if you've read just bits and pieces of it,
Yeah.
let's share. Alba?
After the Storm.
After the Storm, Happy Life.
Existential conflicts, gratitude.
Gratitude, Existential Conflicts, and Family Constellation. Alba, you read
So far they're polling as favorites.
Did anyone else know that these other books were now available in English? They
then
are.
we're good. We've accomplished what we came to
yeah,
do
we
this
accomplished
evening.
something, yes. So Leal Publishers, they have a division here in the U.S., which is the same publishers that Divaldo Franco uses in Brazil. They now have a division here in Miami, Florida. So you can purchase The Conscious Being, Plenitude, Times of Health and Consciousness, Life Challenges and Solutions, Jesus in Our Day, and Happy Life. And these are just some of those. I just grabbed some from my house. I have too many of them to bring in. I started to put them all in a bag. I said, this is too heavy. I'm already carrying an infant around. This is too much. But these are really amazing books. If you hadn't had the chance to purchase them, you can go on, like I said, Leal Publishing, just a plug for them. The book Psychology of Gratitude, as I was saying, and Existential Conflicts are both on, if you go to SGNY, I believe it's .org, the Spiritist Group of New York, they have their own publisher, or they publish their own books, so they publish those two. They're excellent. I know a lot of us have read it here already as people were sharing. And Happy Life, this is on Leal Publisher as well, and this is the second edition. There was a first edition that I believe it was published by the SSB. Daniel, right? Okay. The first, okay. Either way, excellent books to have. I think we all agree on that if you've had a chance to read them. Like Paula was just saying, if nothing else, you'll walk away from this talk going out and purchasing a book and reading it and making time to study it, because it is like having your own personal therapist at home in a way, because you begin this journey of self-discovery.
And that's really why we chose The Conscious Being. It's one of the newer books. It does have direct application to all of us as, you know, we think about ourselves. And we want to make Joanna accessible, because sometimes when you think, oh, I'm going to read a book that has psychology in it, we talked about this, they're going to name theorists, they're going to give words like defense mechanisms, things that we don't feel comfortable with. But fortunately, as these books continue to come out, they're getting easier in their terminology.
Yeah, and they're really well translated from the original Portuguese to English. I can attest to that myself. So rest assured, if you pick up one of these books, you will really gain a lot out of it and from it. And we wanted to share this quote from Paramhansa Yogananda.
I think we should ask Abby to pronounce it.
Paramahansa Yogananda. Okay, so sorry if it's not the perfect pronunciation on my part. Okay, he'll accept it. Thank you, Abby. So this is a great quote that Paula brought to us. I'm just going to read it here for you. He says that, try to realize you are a divine traveler. Got to kind of let that sink in a little bit. Imagine you are a divine traveler. You are here for only a little while, then depart for a dissimilar and fascinating world. Do not limit your thought to one brief life and one small earth. Remember the vastness of the spirit that dwells within you. This is actually a pretty amazing quote, because there's a book, Evolution in Two Worlds, that, I know we mentioned this before, that goes into how we are created, from the time we are small amoebas or even monads to when we are the complex being that you see before you, this human being. And in the beginning of the book, it talks about how that particular book is dedicated for those that are suffering. And when you read and study the book, you will find that it has a lot of scientific background, and you might say, well, what does this have to do? This isn't comforting. This is just talking about evolution. But it kind of references what Yogananda is saying here, because when you study and you see that all the processes that we go through and what it takes to reach where we are, and knowing how many lifetimes that we live, it's reassuring to know that whatever situation you find yourself in, especially if it's a painful one, is only temporary, and that we will have many lifetimes and many opportunities to experience higher and greater things. Just something for us to think about.
And it is nice that we have a beautiful picture of the first American yogi to come to this country back in the 1900s. If you're interested in him, the film is incredible. It's called Awake. And what's nice when Kirsten goes into the book some, one of the gifts that Joanna is really underlining is we now have merged Eastern mysticism and all those healing arts with Western rationality, Christian church, Judaic church, the Muslim church. And it's an amazing gift, because now we can integrate both streams of wisdom and find ourselves much more connected as a planet automatically.
And it's almost like we're coming full circle, because way back when, people relied on shamans and they looked at their doctors as someone of who are spiritually connected to God. They viewed them as some higher power in a sense. But then as medicine developed and things became more divided, they took out any aspect of spirituality or God or anything, and it was just strictly treating just the body. So now it's like we're coming full circle. We're going back to what we were doing before, or we were beginning to go back to with the advent of spirituality, mysticism, and everything becoming more married, and in general, patients wanting more than just the physical. They want to know, could there be something else? So there are a lot of patients that are asking about different treatments that are in existence that an allopathic physician or practitioner may not have been officially trained in. So it's something for us to always be aware of. And I like what you mentioned, Paul. I think it's important as patients, as patients, when you're seeing your healthcare practitioner or specialist or whatever in the medical field, that you actually talk about spirituality and ask them to involve that in your discussions or treatment or what have you.
And briefly, that brings to mind one of the Spiritist medical congresses I attended. We know that's going on this weekend in Miami. When the doctor from Duke came and talked about his research, it was very, to me, amazing and impressive that if the doctor...
Harold Koenig?
Yeah, who's, I think, speaking this weekend
he's
again.
Speaker this weekend, yeah.
He said, if your surgeon, your main doctor in your hospital, merely asks you the question, what religion do you practice? The outcome is better for the patient. If that doctor says, may we pray together, and you can ask for it yourself. That's the only way we're going to keep opening this up. But when the doctor and you pray together, it bumps up the positive outcome and recovery even higher. And how many minutes does that take to connect with your doctor on a spiritual level?
Yeah.
A couple.
To have such an amazing outcome is phenomenal. But it's something we may not be used to. We may even feel uncomfortable. And talking about self-discovery, you might have to have a little internal conversation with ourselves saying, am I really comfortable talking to my doctor about that? Like, is that something weird or strange for me? Just something for us to think about. I'm glad you brought that up, Paul. That's pretty poignant. And talking about some other amazing books of hers, After the Storm, Joanna brings this, or reminds us rather, that the knowledge of spiritual life is vital. She says that it's very beneficial to the preservation of the mental health of human beings. It's just she's reiterating something that we know within Spiritism is true, and how important it is in our everyday life, in our own mental health, which I think in the last 5 to 10 years, the idea and the the paradigm shift that's going on with mental health is pretty huge right now. I think there's a huge, even this collective consciousness is beginning to shift a little bit in the way in which we used to view mental health, and now it's being integrated so much more. I mean, we're going back and forth in terms of healthcare, but still, the bug is in people's ears and mind to want to shift this. So it's amazing because we know that it's very important for us, and also attending to our own spirituality, which is some thoughts we'll get more into a little bit later. I'm going to switch something real quick here because it's knocked out. So there will be another slide that, or there might be some slides I might say, you guys, you can take out your iPhones and take a picture of, because it's really good to have these type of messages on your phone. We use our phones and our technology for so many things that it's really important that where we put our energy, that we're putting them into things that are positive, and that we're looking at things that are positive, and we're feeding ourselves and reminding ourselves, because even the best of us can sort of get off track a little bit, watching TV, being on social media, that we forget how important our spiritual life is, and constantly enriching our mind with such things. It is actually quite vital, since we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Now, this particular book, much like many of her books, have many definitions. Joanna shares many definitions, and we were researching many definitions onto what is consciousness, what is the definition of conscious. So we really enjoyed and loved what Joanna said in this particular part of her book on page 17, when she talks about what happens when we define things. And she says, to define is to somehow limit, to restrict. Even when definitions are flexible, they reduce the thought and cloister it in words, impeding broader possibilities that ought to be explored. I think that makes sense, because as soon as we label something, we constrict it to that one label, and we have this problem now, even within mental health, within healthcare. We label someone, we only allow that person to be that one thing, whereas we should try to be open. So with that being said, we still brought definitions, and it might be very much limited, but we had to premise it by sharing what Joanna says. So bear with us if some of the definitions aren't as broad or hitting the nail on the head directly, but it makes some sense. According to Webster's, they define conscious as perceiving, apprehending, or noticing with a degree of controlled thought or observation. Or if you prefer, in more modern terms, and a term that's used a lot, I think, within millennials, is the term woke. You might see that term, you may not. If you're around young people, you may hear it, you may not. If you have young people on your social media, you may hear it, you may see it. It's this new idea of staying woke, of being aware, being conscientious, know what's going on within you and around you, not just going through life, allowing things just to happen to you without giving it a second thought. And the definition of conscientiousness by Joanna. She says it's the relationship between the content of the psyche and the ego, to the extent that this relationship is perceived by the ego. Now, I think Paula kind of referenced this a little bit before, like, don't become scared. And I know I've talked about the definition of ego, the psyche before, in talks in which the talk that I gave surrounding the psychology of gratitude, I believe it was, where we defined a lot of these terms that seem kind of scary for those of us that may not have any experience in the world of psychology. But that's one of the beauties of Joanna, is that she really wants us to go and not just read her book, but go and do some research into, well, what does that mean? What does the psyche mean? What does the ego mean? So it's something really for us to push ourselves to get out of our comfort zone, because oftentimes we may only grab a book that we know we're definitely going to understand, and we don't have to do much or make much of an effort. But this is part of why her books are kind of so amazing, because it really pushes us out of our comfort zone and forces us to look at life differently, which can be scary, can cause anxiety, which anxiety is normal enough as human beings on this large trajectory that we're going to experience that from time to time. But it definitely is something for us to think about, that we are all conscious beings, or we can reach a higher level of consciousness through this journey of self-discovery, which in part is why she puts out these books, or she has put out this book. This book actually has been in existence, what did we say it was?
Back 93 or something.
I think 1993 was originally written in the Portuguese language, which was the original language. It was psychographed in. But I think 2016 was the one is published in English.
But these are more modern times for psychology anyway, so I'm heartened to see these books coming through as psychology is turning more positive, more humanistic. It's speaking what she is already predicting. And we were even trying to figure out between ourselves, how can we encourage you all to read one Joanna book a year?
Incentives?
Should we set up, a prize?
Leo?
Make it 2, make it 3.
Make it 2, 3 books to read?
So,
Yeah.
we can't make you read a Joanna book, but we really think what you get out of it is amazing for the time you put in it. And then we all have new language when we talk to each other.
No, it's beautiful. And of course, we have this community of people here at our Spiritist Center. So if you're ever reading one of her books, you can always come to us, discuss it. We have a psychologist here who answers some of your questions too, I'm sure. And you also have Google, which can be dangerous at times if you don't know what you're doing with it. But we have so many resources nowadays, and specifically this community here that can always go to each other and say, hey, I read this part of the book. I wasn't sure what it meant. I mean, you can always come together. We can congregate and discuss such things. But the human mind, or the human soul, if I can put it in that context, is so complex. Can I jump to this real quick, Paula?
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
We're so complex, and we think that we know ourselves, but in actuality, it's something Paula is going to go into, but I know we've shown this so many times before.
I call this almost like a stock generic slide. But it's so important that we do keep repeating it. That's one thing I learned working in education. I'm sure Alba can support me, that we do repeat things. The first time we hear it, that's interesting, but then we have to hear it again or hear it again to make it our own, and then we start to really use the information. So it's fine that our iceberg is back, and it's very pertinent to the book because it's the conscious being. I was even calling the book The Conscious Mind for about a week, talking to Kirsten, and she had to remind me it's the being. So 10%, 90%. I happen to be reading Edgar Cayce's monthly magazine, or I think it's every 2 months now this week. It's called Venture Inward. It's a good title for a magazine. And one of the Cayce writers was talking about the statement Jesus made when he said, there are many mansions. And the Cayce writer said that can be interpreted as many states of consciousness. Before you're born, when you're in spirit world, you are part of what we can also call the oneness vibration. So whenever you think of something that makes you just say, love, peace, gratitude, forgiveness, you're in the oneness. You can feel it. It really is part of your being. Now, when you're born, the writer called it moving into a 3-bedroom apartment. That's where we are. We're in what is commonly known as 3D, or 3-dimensional consciousness. So, if we're up here in the 10% in the 3-bedroom apartment, where did all that incredible soul knowledge go? Well, it was deposited in here. Like when people say, why can't I remember my past lives? And then we give reasons why that wouldn't be in your best interest. But you're carrying it all in there. When you sleep, you also go in there because you're setting aside your ego, your thinking 3D mind. And I think he used the word, what you do in the dream time, in that sleep time, gets downloaded into your dreams. So if you're fortunate enough to be recalling dreams, I remember my dream teacher in college really stressed just keeping a notebook and pen by the bed, because they're going to go away very quickly. But through the effort you make to write down a couple phrases, you will find over time that your dream recall increases. So that's one way of accessing your soul. However, in everyday life, the primary way to get more soul consciousness into your everyday waking consciousness is meditation. Meditation, again, like sleep time, is setting aside this ego, thinking, judging, arranging, worrying, adding up, doing whatever, and it's all fine. That's part of what we're doing here. So as you spend some time with meditation, you're giving the soul a direct expression. And we're not saying that prayer isn't helpful, it is. Also, spirit-directed hypnosis also is really incredible, because you can go back down in there and you can pull out some things that maybe were a little uncomfortable, but now you're able to accept and release. So usually when you're talking to spiritists and you're wondering what type of therapy to do, they will suggest hypnosis.
I just want to jump in there real quick, Paula, and something, since you mentioned dreams. There's a book in the series by Andrea Louise, the Andrea Louise Life in the Spirit World series, in Between Heaven and Earth, and I'm just trying to look, I think we're still out of it. The mentor in that book explains what happens when we're sleeping and when we wake up, and why sometimes you wake up and remember dreams that are really bizarre. So the mentor was explaining that, for instance, there's a particular case of a man who was dreaming with one of his enemies, and then they were arguing, two spirits. They both left their physical body temporarily during sleep, the moment of sleep. And one of the mentors comes and assists them when one of the spirits kind of begins to ask for help, like through prayer, while they're dreaming in the spirit realm, when they're disconnected from their physical body. And the spirit mentor goes and helps them, and basically, it disperses them. So when the one guy comes back to his body, wakes up, what he remembers is meeting like some bad person, and then the cops came. So he was thinking about these cops, and Andrea Louise is asking the mentor, why does he think that he dreamt about cops, or a cop came to his rescue? Because you're not a cop, you're a high spirit, you're a good mentor, you went and helped him. And he was explaining how the brain makes an association with what's relative to that person. So for him, his brain didn't know anything about spirit mentors or guides or angels. He just knew that cops were people on the physical plane on the earth that help people that are in danger. So that was the association that the brain made. Just as a little side note, it's in that book Between Heaven and Earth by Andrea Louise and Chico Xavier.
And just to give you a little information on how our consciousness develops. When you're born, and we have a newborn here this evening, so we have a direct representative. You're still, I always think you're still, have one foot in the other world and one foot in this one. But your consciousness is very, I hate to use the word primitive, but it has to start at the basics. And it's reacting. Primarily, it has a fight or flight response, because that's self-preservation. The other fears that babies tend to have automatically are a fear of falling and loud noises, which I saw really persisting, especially the loud noises, when I was working with autistic children in elementary school. So some of them, insensitive people, will continue. And then, because they're human, they pick up more fears based on their experiences and their associations. So all that's happening, babies growing like a sponge, up until the age of 9, and that's when Piaget taught us that beginning of critical thought, the first time you're creating a concept. It's estimated that on a daily basis, we get something like 60,000 messages, like data bits, that are coming, and I don't even know if that's been updated with all the modern technology. that you're going to have to decide, do you want to accept it, kind of store it away in your subconscious or not? So that's quite an onslaught. And you're just starting at age 9 to deal with that. You are influenced by what's in there already. Remember, 9 years, it just kept going in. And it also is influenced by the time of day that you might be exposed to something. So this leads to a question of, how do I change my habits? Because our willpower, as the slide said, is sitting up there at the top of the iceberg. But we don't know what's in there. And we do know that the subconscious prefers what's known to unknown, which makes sense. But if the information has gotten stored through a fear, and you've exaggerated what you think is going to happen, then you're not likely to want to change what you're doing already. It's just too much to conceive of doing. So that's helpful when we say to ourselves, like, I want to change a behavior. I want to go to the gym 3 times a week, anything simple. And our mind says, good idea, let's go. And we say, oh, I've got all the willpower I need. And yet it doesn't happen. So it's still going to be residing down in that subconscious. So is the next slide the ones of the, yeah, okay, so here's help. We always want help. We don't want to leave you struggling with these habits without any kind of direction. Now the CDs, I'm still in this type of technology, I have found are powerfully helpful when you want to change habits. I was fortunate to attend the Hay House conference I don't know how many years it was, in downtown Baltimore. So I saw Dr. Dispenza and Dr. Weiss in action, working with the whole group in the Hippodrome Theater. And we know Dr. Weiss is a pioneer. Through all his hypnosis work, he is showing that, you know, again, back to the divine traveler, we all happen to have gathered for this time. This is how we know each other, but we've been here many times before. And when problems really are rooted in past lives or even in our own childhoods, this type of regression work is really helpful. So if you can't find a therapist or you don't feel like you need one right now, this is a safe way to try it on your own at home. And it also is true for Dr. Dispenza, because we know to make a habit or break at one you don't like takes 6-8 weeks. Who can keep going for 6 to 8 weeks if you don't have some kind of coach cheering you on? I mean, I and a lot of friends started new diets. After 2 to 3 weeks, were we still doing it? No. You know, the initial lure kind of had died down, and we didn't see that bigger result yet, so we had all kinds of reasons not to keep going. And then I put the top one up there. Tara Brach was my insight meditation teacher 10 to 15 or 20 years before her books came out. And because she is a psychologist and an insight meditation teacher, she's really skillful when she makes a CD up with meditations to help you move yourself along further in knowing yourself.
I wanted to jump in here real quick too, Paula, just a kind of a nod to the regression, just as an FYI or an added little tidbit, that within Spiritism, we know that obviously there are a lot of people who don't spontaneously remember their past lives for good reason. There's a reason why we forget, and we don't generally recommend people to do regression therapy or hypnotherapy unless they reach the point where they cannot function in their day-to-day, unable to manage things, people with severe phobias, things of that nature. I'm not a clinical psychologist, I'm just saying that from a Spiritist perspective, to really make sure, and this goes with any medical practitioner, if you're searching out someone to do such a therapy, I would say definitely pray a lot to find the right person for you, because we know in studying the book Liberation how much our spirit obsessors can actually disturb or misguide a health practitioner. You can read more about that in the book Liberation. It's in the first few chapters of the book. It's pretty alarming. We know this, that spirits can interact with any of us, but it's a good reminder for us to be reminded of that. But this is pretty safe, I say like an easy-ish way. It's light. You're doing hopefully you do a prayer before you do it, but it's a CD. You're listening at home. Brian Weiss has time and time again proven his work to be valid and amazing. So he is highly recommended, obviously.
And the nice thing with, light trances, and this is true when I experienced hypnosis myself, you wake up at any moment you want to. If something happens or comes up that's too disturbing, and that whole intention is put into you by the hypnotherapist. So, we've seen movies of people walking around in trances, and we've gotten some, bad advertising, and all the cautions are extremely important. But I would say this is in the lighter range, and again, you're just using it at home. And then, indeed, fortunately, through my travels, I have met 3 people now whom I would trust to refer people to for hypnotic regression, because I've had an experience of either being taught by them or being around them. So luckily, since we're in this area, there are bona fide practitioners.
And just a nod to those who aren't into CDs anymore. There are a lot of podcasts. There's nothing wrong with CDs. When you drive, you can pop them in your car. But if you have the podcast app, you can find a lot of, or some of these particular individuals on podcast online. And if my memory serves me right, I believe Tara Brock had been interviewed by Kardec Radio a number of years ago. It was a great interview. Google Kardec Radio. I think it's kardecradio.com. Not really sure. I don't remember. But I believe she was interviewed there. And the other 2, Dr. Weiss and Dr. Dispenza, I believe, are on podcast or they've been interviewed online as well. So YouTube, the Apple Store, the podcast, I'm not too sure about Android, sorry, but they're on the internet too for those of you who don't have a CD.
That's why it's nice that we represent different generations.
Sure.
Now we say, whoops,
Oops, sorry.
Why do we have God at Home up here? This came up in our talking too, because
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out what is a simple way for spiritists to practice meditation if they're not already inclined to go to like a mindfulness class just because you don't have time. You have the interest. And then in talking with Kirsten, I went, aha, God at Home. We start God at Home with a prayer. Why can't we finish it with 5 minutes of silent meditation? It's an excellent practice to build when you're raising children and you have teenagers. And I just participated in a meditation circle this early afternoon, and we meditated to classical music. So you don't have to just think, oh, I have to go into silence. And there's so much beautiful music we play here to set the environment, that even, I'm just putting the idea out there, and then we wanted to make sure we had modern God at Home meetings.
Yes.
So we've now enlarged our groups.
Definitely. I'm trying to see if we have Family Constellation here, and I think I didn't bring it. In the book Family Constellation by Joanna de Angelis, which I showed here right in the second slide, this particular, oh gosh, is it up there? It is, okay. Got scared. In this particular book, I want to say it's chapter 10, maybe 13. There's a chapter that's entitled God at Home. So for those of you who are listening on the web or the recorded version or who are currently here, the chapter is pretty great. Joanna talks about, gives you an idea of what the God at Home can and should look like. And it's a great chapter. I was so glad that when that particular book was published in English, because the perspective she gives is so open, refreshing. It's very different than the one we were naturally used to growing up. So it was a much better, more fuller perspective on in the terms of family dynamics. It's an excellent chapter to read. Even if you live by yourself, it's great to know it because you can share with others, or if you have a cat or a dog, you can welcome them to your God at Home meeting. Don't laugh. We have a friend, Julio Carvalho, who says that his dog prays or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And Mosey, Milo prays. Sure. Okay, those are the dogs of some people here. Right. Yes.
So just because I like to get feedback, how many people think they might add 5 minutes of meditation to God at Home? Is that easy?
It is.
And then we hopefully, eventually we want to encourage people to practice on their own, and I think, try to get to 15 minutes, but 5 minutes is still better. And I think throughout the day then, as we said, how do we get the soul's consciousness from that 90% up to the 10%? And that's a highway. It's the meditation. I also wanted to mention in reading this Casey magazine that Casey thinkers believe that during Jesus's lost years, he was studying and that he traveled to Egypt and Persia and India. Now, this isn't necessarily considered a total biblical fact, but we have always been amazed that we have all these lost years of Jesus. And so the Casey people, through Casey's revelations, said that he was studying with all the spiritual masters in those countries, learning meditation and other deeper techniques that would help him in his ministry. And then when you were mentioning the word woke, which the younger people have now, embraced, Buddha is the awakened one. So it seems like waking up, becoming more conscious, are terms that are coming into everyday vernacular now, which I get excited about. It's not just being done in some small section. We're all starting to think and share.
I think that's the beauty. I think all religions and all aspects of different religions are all trying to lead us to the same place, independent of whether their beliefs are slightly different or a little bit not quite the road we would go. But I mean, basically all of them are trying to lead us towards God, but also inward, so we can have more deeper reflections. And that's why I think the advent of transpersonal psychology.
I'm
jumping.
Exercise.
Oh, I'm jumping.
It's okay.
I'm jumping.
She wants to make sure we're not here till 8. We won't be. You were giving me a perfect introduction to incorporating other religious points of view, because I'm going to do an exercise that's going to take us under a minute probably, and it's cited in Conscious Being on page 136. And it's a reference to the Russian spiritual master, George Gurdjieff. And he was an amazing influence on the development of spirituality in the East. He did get known in the West. So now we have a nice cross bridge here. So Gurdjieff talks a lot about consciousness, and how do you know you're conscious? Well, we can say right now we're all here. We're listening, we're participating, so we're in our conscious brain. But I would like you to fully sink into your total consciousness right now. So this is how easy this is. I'm going to stop speaking. When I go silent, I would like you just to tune into your body. Just feel the sensations in your body as soon as I stop speaking. This is really going to be easy. Then, as soon as your body and your mind are aligned, you've got it together, then sense your feeling state. Okay, start. Okay, come back to us when you're ready. How was that? Yeah, I know Abby personally, and I know that she's been meditating for a while. So I think that people who have got the habit and the practice of meditation can easily slip into that state. But it's just to help you know that you can tune in at any time. Because we really do get carried away with our thoughts a lot. And this is a way, sometimes we use the word grounding, to be present, to disconnect from what's going on. So it's just tuning in, and all of a sudden, I can feel my body. Before, I'm almost like I'm speeding around, making sure I don't trip and using my head. And then also just to access my feeling state. And there's so many words for feelings. We're not here for that tonight, but just to, become aware. So, yes, I think we're finished this slide.
No, I think that's a great little technique, and something that all of us can use in a span of just a few minutes. You're sitting at your cubicle, at your desk, in your office, in your home. If you just want to recenter yourself, if you will, and sort of come back. when the world around you or inside of you can get a little bit crazy.
And I just noticed that I put this in when I left the house. CD. But this goes along with our exercise, because in the Bible, God says to Moses, I am that I am. And we go, whoa, what kind of a definition of God is this? But it's probably the best one we have. So Wayne Dyer, bless his soul, he created a meditation which is just called I Am. And it's harmonically tuned in to help you relax and deepen. So it's just one more podcast or CD or something. I just like people knowing there are things you can keep using at home. You can keep varying them so that you have a way to keep going.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's important that we do these types of things. I mean, we have some books here at the SSB as well that are conducive to meditation, that allow you to meditate. Some are sort of a guided meditation as well. We've had ones in other languages other than English. So there are many things. Even you can go to your local library, just as an FYI, if you don't have a library card. They actually have a lot of these. I found in my local library, you actually can get some of these CDs, well, what's that, nowadays, and get them for like a week and listen to them and switch it out again and find other ones. So really nowadays, in this modern age, there's no real excuse that we can really use to not gain access to such things.
And the other one, and this is just a reminder because I know you and Daniel weren't present, but I showed, I think Leah was here, Mindfulness Goes Mainstream. Were any of you here that evening when we watched that documentary? Remember the Aetna chief was creating a mindfulness moment in the morning at the Aetna Insurance Company? Well, maybe we'll show it again because I'd like more of a recognition.
That's nice.
But what was so nice about Mindfulness Goes Mainstream, it's easy to remember, it's produced by PBS, is there's a second disc in there, and it's all meditations, whether it's a 5-minute meditation, a 20, so they're really sincere putting this material out, that we all learn how to do this.
That's awesome. And it's so important to access that aspect of ourselves, to not continuously be in this rat race where we're just trying to run and get stuff done, go home, and sometimes I think to myself, there are people on the highway that are like racing, and in order for me to cope with these people that can make you very angry, that are cutting you off, I always tell myself that these people must have a really bad case, and pardon my French, of diarrhea, or they have to use the bathroom, or they're running to a loved one that's dying or sick or something, because I find some of these people are just racing to get home to nothing, to sit in front of the couch and watch their favorite soap opera. But we're racing through life to go home to not do much. Because if we stop a little bit and reflect, do the speed limit and just enjoy maybe you don't have scenery, maybe you don't have trees on your way home. I'm so sorry if you don't. But, maybe just be more present when you're driving, because some people can get sidetracked and almost get into an accident thinking about other things that they shouldn't be thinking about, or that's not the appropriate time. Or it could serve as sort of a meditative moment, just to reflect on your day or go over certain things. So just a little side note, but it's important for us to acknowledge this spiritual aspect of ourselves. And in the 1960s, that idea was really coming to fruition when transpersonal psychology kind of emerged. Really, I think out of a need, out of a collective consciousness to say, look, we need something greater. I mean, probably it's also a nod to that generation that brought a lot of, psychedelics and whatnot during that whole era.
Not all blitzed out.
where, make love, not war. Some of that, I think there's something to be said about that. And there's some research and work on psychedelics, by the way, as a side note. But really, it's because humanity, we needed this. It already was somehow in the works in terms of other religious or spiritual areas. So, of course, transpersonal psychology, for us as spiritists, it makes sense that this exists. And transpersonal meaning beyond the physical. It's marrying mind, body, and spirit. And for us as spiritists, the spiritual life, what that could mean for us, or if you're a Buddhist or from a different belief system, just being more in touch with the more spiritual side of things. It was deemed the fourth force because there's other three forces of psychology, which I'm not a psychologist and I won't be going into. But there are the other three forces, the behaviorist, humanistic approaches, and the psychodynamic. If you have questions about that, I'm sure Paula can answer
I'll
that.
give you 1 minute. I know that we can speed through this because, I mean, we've all heard of Freud and Jung.
Yes.
And maybe some Adler who work in school systems, because some of the things we did in schools were based on Adler's work of what are the goals of misbehavior, like power, revenge, inadequacy, things like that, attention. But so from psychoanalytic came psychodynamic. It just means that we're spending time with people. We understand there's a 90% underneath that iceberg. And then the behaviors really became popular with managed care. There's no other way to describe it. Also, psychology struggled to be accepted as a valid method. So they have really imitated the medical model. And I think right now, transpersonal is going to save that. There's nothing wrong with having a DSM-5, having a list of diagnosis, having a reference point for people, but we know that's not the whole human being. You can't really even think that a person's going to know themselves after 10 or 12 behavior-oriented sessions. They will think better, they will have better habits, but knowing yourself is a lifelong journey. At times you spend time in some professional manner, other times you just keep going yourself. So then we got to humanistic, and that was my favorite as a school counselor because it was Carl Rogers, teaching active listening. The thing I fell in love with, and I hope everyone here, and I'm happy to repeat it, it's merely listening to a person and mirroring back to them what you think they're feeling. So instead of running around problem solving at the intellectual level, we go, there's another human being there who can sense or guess that I really am frustrated or I'm disappointed. And that shifts the whole conversation immediately. And I liked working with children because they didn't hesitate to tell me I was wrong. And it doesn't matter because I don't know your feeling. I'm only making an educated guess. So thank you, Carl Rogers, for that. And we also have Abraham. You want to take him?
I just want to say that the active listening really is a lost art because there really is no, unless there is, and I'm wrong, and today is what, I don't know what day is it, October something, 2018, unless there's a course I don't know about, but there's no real course on how to listen. Nobody's taught that. And I think most of us don't know how to do that unless you're really in touch with your feminine side or you're a female, who we have more of a tendency to be more of listeners and sometimes more of talkers. But if you're more within your male side, because we all have the male and feminine within us, you might be less inclined to listen due to many other things. But it's something, it's truly an art, and it is something we should be practicing and learning. I remember during nursing school, we had to do a lot of learning about how to actively to listen to your patient. So it really is something that if you haven't practiced, I'm sure Paula can present to you a couple of, or mention some books you can read more about. It really is vital in terms of dealing with other people. And if you deal with other people, which we all do, whether it's your work, at your Spiritist center, in your church, synagogue, wherever, or just at, I don't know, at the store, you might be talking to people. It's really important to learn how to listen, to stop. It goes back again to not running that rat race. Stopping and listening, being present, mindful of what's in front of you, and really giving that person your full attention.
And I shared with Kirsten when we were preparing this that I saw something on PBS or somewhere where Sarah Silverstein, she's a well-known younger comic, she was being harassed on the internet, on the email system, whatever, somebody help me. She was getting harassing texts or emails. Yeah. So her response was reflective active listening. She just sent back to the person, you must have been really hurt in your childhood. You sound so angry. And it was like a miracle. The person opened up, and the end of the story was she got him hooked up with mental health treatment. So you never know. That's why I encourage you to listen for feelings and name them. It deepens conversations with everyone.
This is very, very true. Thank you, Paula, for jumping in and mentioning that. A lot of us know, and this is one person, one pioneer I will talk about, Abraham Maslow. We've talked about him before. He was one of the pioneers in the transpersonal approach. I think we brought his triangle here before. Joanna talks a lot about him. So there are some really great thinkers out there.
He's a bridge, humanistic to not really all trans.
There you go. Go ahead. Yeah, sure. Jump in there. Go ahead.
I mean, who knows? Because, we're talking to the world here, and we can all be fact-checked.
Yes. I mean, please fact-check me.
But when you do we love it. We have icebergs. Now we have triangles.
Upside-down
because,
triangles.
the basic needs of everyone are for food, clothing, and shelter, and safety in a home. But as Maslow kept going, he got to emotions. You need to feel secure and safe. And then when he got to the top of his triangle, he called it self-actualization. And that's really, to me, the bridge into transpersonal. He didn't really name spirit like we have with, some of the, like Dr. Weiss or people working right now. But we need a bridge. We need a way to get to spirit. And we're here.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the reasons why we brought transpersonal psychology, because this is the first chapter of this book in The Conscious Being. Joanna labels it the fourth force, which is a nod to transpersonal psychology. It's another term for it. So it's how she opens up the book. It's how she's sort of laying down the foundation of this book to open up our minds to a different perspective on life and living and mindfulness in our health, and whether it's our spiritual or our mental health. And it's really, really, and I think we can't say it again, and I think we say this a lot with a lot of our Spiritist book, it's an amazing book that you should have in your library, that you should have in your arsenal to utilize. Of course, I love that Joanna says that, in so many words, and I'm paraphrasing her, it's not verbatim, that, utilizing her books or this knowledge is just one way to reach this self-actualization that Maslow would talk about, or finding balance, but that it's also okay if we need to seek more professional help, therapies of some sort, whether it's meditation, reflective, moments of reflection, utilizing spiritism, spiritist therapies, whatever it is, as long as it's safe, to bring you back to balance and to do more of inner reflection inside of ourselves, which kind of leads us on to our next sort of topic, in a sense, or the reflections from this particular book that are pretty amazing. That she actually tells us that, I'm going to quote her here because it's easier than in my words, only those who analyze themselves, those of us who are willing to face ourselves without pretense or coming undone, can attain lucidity. To this avail, they neither judge themselves nor make excuses, nor do they accuse or blame themselves. They strive for self-discovery. This is pretty huge because all of us, at some point in time, when we're thinking about or reflecting about ourselves, we'll be judging ourselves like, gosh, why am I like that? Oh, that's so annoying I'm like that. Or why did I think that? Or that's so bad. Or we make excuses for it. I'm going to keep reading the next two little tidbits, and I'm going to explain more because it's important for me to read the next two tidbits before I go into what I wanted to go into. Joanna says, self-identification is followed by the endeavor of inner transformation, utilizing the tools, and this is important to note, this is why it's in different color, utilizing the tools of 1, self-love, self-esteem, and prayer, which stimulates discernment, relaxation, which releases tensions, and meditation, which fosters inner growth. When we are embarking upon a journey of self-discovery, you cannot do so in a successful manner unless we are utilizing these tools to sort of support ourselves. These are just some of the tools. I'm sure there are other tools out there that exist that people could probably mention or say, well, I use this, I have this and that. But these are some from a Spiritist perspective that Joanna is recommending. And we always refer to Joanna lovingly as the spiritist psychologist. She does not call herself that. It's just what we call her. But it's a nod to psychology because she says self-love, self-esteem. Does that look blurry to you guys or just me? Mm-hmm. Self-love, self-esteem, prayer. And she says prayer stimulates discernment. It helps us sort of clear out that fog when we're going through difficulties. And relaxation. Paula just showed us one quick way. In a minute or two, you can relax. Deep breathing. Just taking a few short, deep breaths can allow us to calm down. And meditation, which fosters growth. Joanna goes on to say, only through an emotion-free, imagine that, being devoid of not having emotion, only through an emotion-free examination of one's reality, an examination that avoids feelings of self-pity, self-promotion, justification, or guilt, can one get an honest self-portrait and what is needed to love and help oneself more immediately afterward. What is she saying here? She's saying that when I'm going through this journey of self-discovery, that there has to be a moment during meditation and reflection when I'm thinking about myself, where I'm sort of coming out of myself and examining myself and not judging and saying, gosh, you're this or you're that, or no, you're this because of that, or oh, that's terrible. But emotion-free and saying, well, this is what I'm experiencing, but I know that I want to be in a better place. I know that I'm an immortal spirit, and not making what she says here an honest self-portrait. In order for us to do that, we're not doing any of this self-promotion. We're not saying, oh, but you know what? But I do all this other great stuff. I'm great. It's this weird paradox where on one hand we have to have self-love, but we have to have a balance to also view the reality. The beauty in this book that Joanna talks about, and Paula can kind of comment on this too, that things arise within us, whether it's just issues that sort of pop up or coming to the surface from our subconscious, those things never present themselves until we're ready. So if something's popping up, whether it's some sort of anguish, anxiety, fear, whatever it is, it's coming to life because we have reached the point where we are ready to manage it and to face it. Although we may not feel like it, although we may feel like, no, I'm not ready, I don't want to deal with this, this is a nuisance, but it's there to help us and to push us forward. We are not those temporary feelings. We are not our anguish. We are not our anxiety. It's just temporary until we can reach our higher self, if you will.
No, that's wonderful, and that was part of our sharing to do this talk this evening. And I learned that principle that it comes up when it's ready through living a pretty long life now and being involved with myself and other people. So I call it divine wisdom. You might have suffered some kind of trauma as a child, but it doesn't surface until you're 30. Why? Because now you have the structure to deal with it. So even in the moments where you feel like it's too much, I'm overwhelmed, you actually are being given that task to deal with when Spirit knows you can handle it. So we might have to repeat that to ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
And I just want to show a synchronicity. Here we are. We both agreed that we would go through the book and really talk about parts we loved. I wrote down the same quote on my index card.
I didn't know it.
Which she did not know about, but again, it's fun to share generations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Paula. I mean, the book, again, it's filled with so many pearls of wisdom for us to think about and for us not to really be afraid. It seems like a daunting task or something that can be relegated for another time and moment, but I would highly recommend that we start today in this inner reflection, whether it's through meditation, if you want to ease into it a little bit, and just doing some of the exercises that I think we still have time for.
Well, I also have a little part I wrote up too.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, it looks like we know we've passed the hour mark, so we're heading into another 10 minutes.
Thankfully,
probably.
Spiritism it really talks about forgiveness, so I think we're okay. They'll forgive us a little bit.
So the part that I really radiated with or really thought was important when I went through conscious being was this understanding of psychological maturity. And Joanna talks about psychological immaturity. And then, of course, our goal is to become psychologically mature. So I thought, where did I first understand how complex we are as people? It was from my flower essence teacher 25 or 30 years ago. Her name is Michelle Smallwright. She has a farm in Northern Virginia called Perelandra, and she makes flower essences there. And what she taught us was we are multi-level beings. We're physical, we're emotional, we're mental, and we're spiritual. And she just called it PEMS, so we could remember it, P-E-M-S. So, oh my goodness, have we now expanded the territory on what becoming mature is? We now have 4 levels that we need to reach maturity in. And fortunately, I worked with young children for a long time. It's so obvious to me that we're not proceeding step by step on those 4 levels. You can see variations in childhood development quite easily. And in adults, people talk about it at times too. Wow, look how intellectually gifted that person is, but they seem socially insecure. So it's, in my mind, we just want a good map. It's how Kirsten emphasized, how do we get through to emotion-free judgment? If that isn't a daunting task, because our trigger is already to judge and put it in the plus or minus quality. So meditation helps, these practices help, catching yourself, so that we can get to acceptance, really. And I will say you're fortunate in life if you have worked with a mental health practitioner. I would like to reverse the stigma, which was around for a long time. It's the wise person who consults a mental health practitioner, and then your psychological maturity gets jump-started. And don't be discouraged if it wasn't all you wanted it to be. And also, don't think that you only do it once. I really think it's a developmental process, and to avail yourself at different time periods, even if it's just a workshop somewhere or an in-depth weekend. Years ago, when I was in a relationship, I went to Dr. Harville Hendrix's weekend on how to be conscious in your relationship. Well, he and I learned more in 2 days. We separated about 2 months later, but it was, but it was a conscious separation. And I thought, wow, why didn't somebody teach me this when I was in high school? Well, luckily, that's why I feel good about young people. There are so many more helpful things that they're learning now, and they are going to be different. And also, just to share with you, doctors do have a basic understanding of stress. They know that stress will create physical problems. I feel better, though, when people don't just get medication from their GP, but they go to a psychiatrist, and now in some states, psychologists can dispense medication. But to put in a plug for my doctor, whom of course I like, that's why I go to him, he now has incorporated an annual stress test. I just did it 2 weeks ago. So when I go in for my physical, I get on an exercise bike, and I have a computer program, and I'm cycling to see where I fit with my age range, because he believes, and some doctors believe this now too, that a better predictor of how you age in life, not that the blood work still isn't important, but it's your aerobic fitness. So I am happy that I do this once a year, and now we have some statistics for me for a couple of years. And then he is so open now. I am like so happy. The first time I met him 10 years ago, I gave him a package of goji berries because I wanted him to know that I had many ways of taking care of my health. And now he is studying nutrition. He is going deeper into the benefits of plant-based eating. He's not saying everybody do it, but he is a wonderful resource now for nutrition and exercise, and I never would have thought that of a general practitioner before. Okay, so you were gonna...
No, there's that.
I know I'm going to get to that. Let me shorten up immaturity, and then we'll get to the, do you want to just, well, we can leave those sentences up there. So what about psychological immaturity? We know it's rooted in childhood insecurities. I'm not blaming anyone. It's just a path the child will go through. The insecurities might have come from family, it might have come from school experiences, that might have come from the environment. They just came, okay. Then they unfortunately persist into adulthood, and we say the person is conflicted, or there's a conflict, they can't figure it out. And it can manifest in a personality, you know, character thing, it could be emotional, it could be behavioral, it could be some habit. As Spiritists, we also add in the effects of past lives, and also how we in our unawareness have opened the door in this life to have, you know, disturbing spiritual elements come in and hook in with us when we're starting to go off track. So fortunately, we have an even bigger picture on what happens to us psychologically. And very simply, we turn to Joanna for the answers, and they're just two. Why are we psychologically immature? We need to love ourselves. And we all agree to that. The journey is becoming investigators into where we're not loving ourselves and catching ourselves. And like in psychology, we called it the inner child work. As an adult, going back and soothing that inner child, the one who gets easily hurt or easily frustrated, who's highly sensitive, it's all okay. We just know we can now move into our adult presence. And the other thing that she clearly outlines is avoiding reality. We don't really want to look at what is. So we suffer because we avoid it, we distract ourselves, we numb ourselves. It's not going away. It's just what is. But it's all the scripts we put on top of it. So yes, it does take courage to look at what is. But wow, is it a lot easier to then keep moving. One time I had an image I used for myself that I thought I was a plane that kept circling. I had this issue. I had all the knowledge I needed. Why did I keep circling? Why did I never land and face the problem? What was scaring me so much that I preferred to stay in this flight pattern of circling rather than dealing? Well, we have a clue from that iceberg again. 90% is subconscious, and it wants what is known. Somehow we've gotten the idea in our heads that the unknown is terrifying and scary. The unknown is just unknown. A close friend of mine came by last weekend as a surprise, and we shared that we had both lost close friends this summer. And then we talked about, you know, fear of death, which Joanna goes into in the book too, as our primary fear. And aren't we in much better shape to deal with that normal fear of death when we know we're divine travelers? Luckily, my two friends I had deep spiritual conversations with. I miss them and I prayed for them, but I know they're well equipped to transition. He wasn't so sure. He knew his friend was a good person, but they had never had a spiritual conversation. So I guess I'm encouraging you with people just to have the courage to have a spiritual conversation. And it can be a great relief for people. Just like I said, naming someone's feeling may sound funny in the beginning, but it will open a door. Having a spiritual talk, and even if they say, I don't know, I'm confused, I've become agnostic, it doesn't matter. At least it's being discussed. Okay, that was my plug on talking to people. I'm going to now not do this, which is fine. It's always good to overproduce. And we're going to go to very simple statements here, and then do our final sharing.
I can read this.
Yeah.
This is from this particular journal that Paula brought to our attention, the Wellbeing Journal. It's a great quote out of an article entitled Accepting Feelings and Healing, an interview with Shannon McCrae, PhD. She says, now I see that these feelings, actually, Paula, before I go into it, do you want to talk a little bit about the article at all, or?
No, I can just say that the person, and she's now a regular contributor to Wellbeing Journal, is a medical intuitive, and she's a healer. So her articles are fascinating because people come to her with all kinds of physical conditions. And just like years ago, Carolyn Mace worked with Dr. Norm Shealy. They were the pioneers in a holistic physician teaming up with a medical intuitive so they could go in and look at the original emotional blocks, the original emotional traumas that were never dealt with that then pop up 50 years later as some kind of illness. I'm not saying every illness follows this path, but it's another encouragement to keep on cleaning yourself out subconsciously and owning stuff. And that was the other tip that I didn't go into with this extra things I wrote up, but Joanna encourages us to take responsibility for ourselves. And that includes thoughts. Thoughts are spiritual forces. You can sit there in the privacy of your home and think that nothing's happening as you go through all these mud mine thoughts, but they are going out into the universe. So her thoughts I always find helpful, but I love this magazine anyway. It's a good one.
And I think this particular quote, what she's saying here, is sort of a way in which we can deal with certain things in our lives. And this is directly out of the article. Now, I see that these feelings are just part of life. Every one of us has feelings that don't feel good, but the greater consciousness absorbs them. I will therefore not separate this feeling out of all that is or judge it and try to ignore it, because it will then take hold in my energy field and my body. I will no longer judge others for their feelings either. I may not choose to be around certain people, but I won't judge. I will accept and love. And this is a great nod to Joanna and her work of saying self-acceptance and non-judgment. And this is the best way. And you all can share your own feedback on this later and be in your own mind. This, for us, is sort of a sensing. Like you can sort of, when you become more self-aware, you can sort of feel this non-judgment. We know when we're judging others. We know what it feels like if you pay enough attention to your body and how you feel.
And the other wonderful thing that Joanna shared, I think you remember from Christ's agony in the garden, watch and pray. She said, watch what your heart is feeling. Watch what's coming out of your heart. When you tune into that heart, you can get right where you need to be. And again, the mind will gloss over things. The mind will rationalize. The mind will just say, let's get out of here. Let's not feel through this experience. But the heart won't. And the heart is your savior.
Because it will force you to deal with things that you might otherwise not want to deal with, because it'll just always be there.
And it is, like we've said over it, it's just a feeling. Let it be a wave. Let the resentment be a wave that keeps moving. You don't hook onto it. You sit there, do your deep breathing, and just say, thank you, goodbye.
Yes, exactly. I wanted to move on to coming here to an end, some focus questions. Paula, did you want me to read it, or did you want to read?
Well, it's interesting. I met this lady at the New Visions bookstore in York, Pennsylvania once, and she is a medium. And this is one of her books. She wrote a beautiful book on what happened after her husband died and the communication they had between them. So that's a good one to give people who've lost a significant other. But this is a small book, and she just, is talking again. Many different streams talk about the same thing, but how do we get to love? How do we get to Joanna's self-love and love? Okay, here's a question we can ask ourselves.
When you look at your life, can you see your experiences that you are currently giving your energy to that are not in alignment with love? It's a question we should be asking ourselves. What am I putting my energy into? What am I surrounding myself with? When I look at my life, what am I currently giving our energy to that's not in alignment with love?
Wow.
It's going to have to be a rhetorical one for right now, given the time.
Yeah.
Can we go to the second one?
Yeah.
I'm going to put the second question up here, and I highly, highly recommend those of you who have smartphones to take a photo of this and to think about it later, to discuss it with a loved one or a friend who comes from a spiritual background or who's open to it, and have these kinds of discussions. They're really good for self-reflection. Joanna definitely, I would say, endorses this type of self-reflection and asking ourselves. It's just a way for us to gauge where we're at. Are there certain people and or experiences that you have trouble allowing them to have the experience they need to have? I'm going to read that again. Are there certain people and or experiences that you have trouble allowing them to have the experience they need to have? I'm going to let this sink in just for a second. There was a Wayne Dyer quote I had on one of my social media platforms for a long time. I think it was Facebook until it's not there anymore. I think the quote went something like, we should love people for who they are and not for what we want them to be. And that's huge. Because if we're really honest and do some self-reflection, there may be one person, or maybe two, this might happen a lot with parents, I don't know, that we want someone that we love to be what we want them to be, instead of just accepting them for what they are. I know in talking with some patients who are in the LGBT community, LGBTQ, and I think even I now, community, and their experiences with coming out, and some parents obviously don't accept it. Some parents takes a little bit of time, and one of the things is that because I had one case in particular where their particular young man said, well, his mother had said she had visions of what she wanted her son to be, and she had to let that image die first, and then accept this rebirth in her mind of what her true son is. And it was a huge spiritual awakening for her to come to terms with how she was living her whole life. So these are, anytime anything comes in our lives, it's not exactly as we wish it to be. It can be really difficult for us to manage, but in actuality, we should allow others to walk the journey that they need to walk.
And I think it really applies to long-term marriages. I had a really deep conversation with my cousins in Seattle. They've been married over 30 years. And I was impressed because, my cousin's an engineer. And he said to me, this is not the person I married. I love her more deeply than I did when I married her, but she is not the same person. We have had at least 2 moments that were critical junctures in our 30 years. And it took us a year or 2 to reorganize after we got through them. So that really is a journey of waking up one day and all of us saying, whoops, this is not exactly who I thought I committed myself to, because some things come up. And then having the courage to go to a therapist with your wife and work on some issues. And then coming back. I'm not saying this works for everyone, right, but I was very impressed with that process.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, and I think I like something that a Spiritist speaker had said once, Divaldo Diaz. He said that oftentimes we take photographs of people, and I'm going to sort of add to his statement. We take photographs of people, and we never allow them to be anything but that photograph that we've taken of them. If they step out of those boundaries, then we're more than likely not willing to accept that, because, well, that's not who I married. That's not the friend that I thought you were. And it's good for us to be reminded that we are multifaceted people. We are millennial. We've had many incarnations, and most of us are just walking around knowing just that tip of the iceberg of the people around us. Most times, sometimes not. But it's good for us to constantly remind ourselves that we are very deep people, even if we don't reveal that. I'm going to skip to our last thing, and this is a part of what you should have received when you walked in here today, the handout, the rules for being human. How many of you actually read it? Okay. Shall we read it?
Well, yes, and we thought the best way to do it would be to start in the back. We always start in the front.
Thank you.
So you read just a segment, and then the person who would be the next to the back will go next until we work our way up here.
Daniel, should I give the mic? No? Okay, go ahead. For those of you who are watching, you can just read what's on the screen here.
You will receive a body. You may like it or hate it, but it will be yours for the entire period this time around.
That's different.
That is different. I don't know why that's different.
It's okay. It's close enough.
Yeah, it's close. I'm not sure why it's different. Oh, I know why. Because what I grabbed off the internet. That's
Yes.
why. But it's very close.
It
Okay.
shows we're all humans, which is what we're trying to emphasize here. Okay?
Should
Okay.
I read it from here then? Yeah. But what you guys have is very close to this. I think I probably clicked on a similar image to this. So the first one is, you will receive a body. You may love it or hate it, but it's yours for the entire time you're here. So accept it. You will learn lessons. You will be enrolled in a full-time informal school called Life, where you will have the opportunity to learn lessons. Like them or not, these lessons are specific to you and are the keys to discovering the meaning of your life. There are no mistakes, only lessons. This is so funny. We were at a football game last night, and I have no idea why, but there was a young man dressed in some sort of outfit at our local high school football game who for some reason yelled this out. And I just realized this is what he had said. He yelled to another friend. I don't know if he was quoting I don't know, some sort of show, but he yelled out so loud, "There are no mistakes, only lessons," and ran away right in front of me. It's crazy. Anyway, growth is a process of trial and error and experimentation. The failed experiments are just as much a part of the process as the experiment that ultimately, quote unquote, works. A lesson is repeated until learned. A lesson will be presented to you in various forms until you have learned it. Once you have learned it, you can move on to the next lesson.
That's my favorite.
Learning does not end. There is not a part of life that does not contain its lessons. If you are alive, there are lessons to be learned. There is not better than here. When your there becomes here, you will be tempted to fixate on a different there that will, again, look better than here. Learn to appreciate and enjoy what you have and where you are on your journey. Others are merely mirrors of you. You cannot love or hate something about another person unless it reflects to you something you love or hate about yourself. What you make of your life is up to you. You have all the tools and resources you need. What you do with them is up to you. Your answers lie inside you. The answers to life's questions lie inside you. All you need to do is look, listen, and trust. And last but not least, you will forget all this at birth. We thank you all for listening and walking through this journey with us. It was a little longer than we had planned, but such is life, if you will. I don't think, Daniel, we have any time for comments or questions. It's 7:30.
You can do 5 minutes.
I can't hear you. Yes or no?
5 minutes.
Okay.
This is a smaller group, fortunately.
Does anyone have any comments to make, questions, or... Abby?
First, I wanted to thank you both. This was a great talk, and also it was such a good balance, the two of you. So thank you very much. And also, this is a statement. Just wanted to say, as far as the meditation and mindfulness, my meditation group went into a city school in a very bad area to teach his kids meditation and mindfulness. The teacher said, they're never going to learn. Their home situation is so terrible. And when we went into the classrooms, the different ones, the kids were all over the place, very wild. And finally, they really took to the meditation and mindfulness. And one kid said to me, what do you do when everything around you is going crazy? The people, what you hear out on the streets, where am I supposed to go? And I just told him, just go into a quiet little area, doesn't even have to be in a whole room, and we showed him how to meditate. And by the time this was a pilot, and 6 weeks later, the teachers thanked us for coming in there, and for a while, the kids just ended up listening to the teachers, and the teachers incorporated in their daily lesson plans meditation and mindfulness. And now in a Baltimore City school, instead of sending kids to detention, they're going to a meditation class and teaching mindfulness. So really does work. If it works with those kids, it can work with us.
Thank you, Abby. That's pretty awesome. I saw some of that on the internet talking about that. That's pretty awesome. That's powerful stuff. Anybody else?
No, you give it to her. I just had a thought based on what she said, what Abby said.
You have a mic, right?
Oh, I do. Amazing. It's Earth to Paula. It's technology. I have to, embrace it. Just when Abby was talking, it reminded me of Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Peace is Every Step. Not only can you create a room in a school for children to go and do some breathing and meditation, but Thich Nhat Hanh called it your breathing room at home. He suggested you dedicate a closet if you have no other room when you're sharing with people. But in his family, they had enough space to create a room with just some cushions or chairs. And his story was when the father came home from work stressed, the 3-year-old just went up, took his hand, and they went to the breathing room together.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. We want more. Can you have a second part? I recently have been listening to a talk by Divaldo Franco that he did 2 years ago in Argentina about our spiritual mentors. And in his presentation, in his talk, he speaks about different levels or states of consciousness. And he said that the first one is the sleepy mode. We are just like in a sleep mode. And then the second level is like a dreaming and sleeping. So we go back and forward between awareness of our consciousness. Then is the conscious being, and then is the universal consciousness. That's not the abyss.
Which is the one that accepts everything. In our quote, the one that was behind, we go, where does it go? It goes to the universal consciousness. And if we truly get that the universal consciousness holds everything.
So just wanted to mention that.
No, that's wonderful.
It's a journey to get there.
You even light up when you talk about it. So we know that's concentrating on this work.
Louisa, did you have a...
Huh?
No? Okay.
There's
Oh, Leo, I'm
there's
sorry.
an arm out of the closet. What's understanding is
Uncle
fear
Leo
of
has a
falling.
question. Oh, Raphael does. Look at his face.
Thank you again for the information that you both of you shared. One of the things that I want to comment, and if you guys can extend a little bit more, going through some experiences on decision-making process. And one of the things that I come across often is that whenever we have to decide upon something or, again, make a decision, right? Most of the time we stumble in our biases. And one of the slides that you had about reflection, the third paragraph that you shared, Joanna de Angelis goes through in this not having feelings towards our self-improvement. And what it comes to me is this idea of not letting our bias get into this process. So what would you say would be a good way to avoid that bias, or even perhaps recognize it and kind of deal with it in a more subtle way, that it does not influence in our decision process towards ourselves to become a better person?
Well, the good thing is you're conscious of your bias. I mean, that's the first step. Most of us are walking around with biases that we're unconscious of. We may learn about it because all of a sudden a friend gets offended or something backfires at work. Sometimes we learn about it the hard way. So then you go, oh, okay, here it is. Just that whole act of naming it, knowing it, you're distancing yourself from that automatic reflex. So it doesn't necessarily be the lens through which you make your decision.
Here, someone take the baby real quick. I just to add to what Paula was saying, I think just that the act of being aware, and I really like the idea I was reading recently about journaling, and to sort of take an inventory, and a lot of people might do this in instances of wanting to do weight loss and taking inventory of your food. But journaling is a great way to sort of get to know what thoughts you're having. Like, just jot down, whether it's the end of the day and the thoughts that you've had during the day, what's going on with you, how you've reacted, sort of. And I think St. Augustine or St. Francis of Assisi, one of the great minds of this world, doing an inventory of your day, how you reacted in circumstances, how you dealt with the things that you said. And I love what Paula mentioned. One of the great ways to sort of know yourself is living with people, because you come out and say things that begin to offend people, and we may not have realized that it was offensive to others. So it's a great way to know some of those things. And everything is just practice and getting to know yourself, and it's all okay. And that, I like what Alba said, it's a journey of learning to love yourself, learning to accept. But you wanted to add something, Paula?
Now I'm just going to add something that I thought I would share if we had time, but we seem to be in extended time. But it's pertinent to Leo's question. I read this metaphysical newspaper from the DC area, and this was the magazine for the fall. And it talks about the welcome prayer. So here's some more steps you can do. And the first one is what we all did here tonight. You sense your bodily sensations. So you know if you're connecting with a bias, there's something going on. There's a tightness in your body. There's something going on. The next thing you do is you just say, welcome. Doesn't that shift the whole terrain? Instead of clenching around it, fighting it, try to put it down, put it on the side. And the last one is called letting go. And this author gives some lead sentences. So this is kind of the framework he's talking about. Say to yourself, I let go of my desire for security and survival, or my desire for esteem and attention. As human beings, we're out there really trying hard to be well thought of, to be loved. And at times, we may have to shift and say something that's not all that popular. I let go of my desire for power and control. Who doesn't want power and control over situations? Then we feel like we'll be okay. Sometimes we have to let that go. I let go of my desire to change the situation. So simply by knowing where you are, welcoming whatever is in, and then letting go of kind of like your need at the moment in that decision making. What Joanna's saying, or this author is saying, you're creating the openness for spirit and intuition and everything you really want, who is wiser than you are, to come through and provide your answer.
Absolutely. Well,
Okay.
thank you all so much for this evening, allowing us to share with you. We're going to be transitioning to our spiritual passes.